The worst moment of my life happened in front of a dozen strangers on my own front lawn. I stood there in the dark, my neighbour Sharon beside me, watching the party lights twinkle inside the house my late husband and I built. My son, Mark, and his wife, Jessica, were inside, laughing with friends I didn't know. I wasn't invited. A woman I didn't recognise walked out onto the porch, and I heard Jessica's voice drift through the open window. "Oh, Carol's not here," she said with a little laugh. "Honestly, it's my house now anyway, she just holds the paper." The woman giggled, and my heart shattered into a million pieces right there on the grass. They were laughing at me. Friend, before I go on, let me ask you, would you do me a kindness? Tap subscribe so you don't miss what comes next, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. It helps me see just how far my story reaches. The whispers from the party felt like slaps to my face. I was just an old woman, a silly piece of paper to be ignored. Mark, my only son, didn't even step outside to look for me. I wanted to run, to just disappear into the night, but my feet were stuck to the ground. That house was my history, my memories, my gift to them. And my daughter-in-law was claiming it as her own prize, making me the fool in front of everyone. How did it come to this? It's a hard thing to admit, but it all started because I tried to do something good. It began 6 months earlier, on a sunny Tuesday in my living room. I'd been a widow for 2 years, and I was lonely, but I was comfortable. My son, Mark, and his new bride, Jessica, were struggling to save up, living in a tiny apartment over on Elm Street. So, I offered them my first house, the little 2-bedroom over in Maple Creek where my husband and I started out. "There's no rent," I told them, my heart full. "Just cover the bills and be happy," Mark cried. He was so grateful. Jessica hugged me tight and called me the best mother-in-law in the world. She promised to take care of the rose bushes my husband had planted. I felt so sure I was doing the right thing. A month later, I went over for dinner. The first thing I noticed was the little picture of my husband and me, the one from our wedding day, was gone from the mantel. I found it tucked away on a dusty bookshelf. When I asked about it, Jessica gave me a tight, bright smile. "Oh, we just wanted to make the space feel a bit more us, you know? A fresh start." Her words felt strange, like a little stone in my shoe. I told myself I was being silly. But as I drove home that night, I couldn't shake a question that kept circling in my mind. Was she just making a home, or was she trying to erase me? The next warning sign was something I could not ignore. I was at a neighbourhood garage sale down the street, just browsing, when my eyes landed on my mother's crystal vase. It was sitting on a wobbly card table with a $15 sticker on it. My blood ran cold. I had left that vase in the built-in cabinet at the Maple Creek house. I bought it back without a word and called Jessica as soon as I got home, my hands shaking. Her voice on the phone was light and breezy, like she was talking about the weather. "Oh, that old thing," she said. "It was so dusty and I found a little crack in it. I figured you wouldn't mind if I got a few bucks for it to put towards a new rug." She sold a piece of my mother, a piece of my history, for a rug. I was so stunned I couldn't even speak. Mark got on the phone then, full of apologies. "Mum, I'm so sorry," he said. "She just doesn't think sometimes. It won't happen again." But his words felt hollow. My daughter-in-law didn't just not think. She had looked at something precious to my family and saw it as trash she could trade for cash. He promised it wouldn't happen again, but a promise from a man who won't stand up for his own mother. What is that truly worth? After the vase incident, things got cold. A month went by before my daughter-in-law Jessica called me. She had this sweet fake voice she used when she wanted something. This time she wanted to set some house rules. For me. In my own house. "Carol," she said, "we just need our privacy, so if you could call at least 2 days before you want to drop by, that would be for the best." I was standing in my own kitchen, looking at a picture of my husband, and I felt my knees go weak. I told her I just wanted to feel welcome in the home we built. Her voice turned hard then. "We can't live our lives feeling like our landlord is watching us." Landlord. That's what she called me. Not Mom or Carol. I was just the landlord. I could hear my son, Mark, in the background saying nothing. His silence was the loudest sound I had ever heard. He was letting her do this, letting her push me further and further away. I felt like a stranger to my own family. The house I gave them out of love was turning into a fortress, and Jessica was the one in charge of the gate. I hung up the phone that day with a terrible feeling in my gut. She wasn't just my son's wife anymore. She was the gatekeeper, and she was locking me out. The next blow came where I least expected it, in the canned goods aisle of the grocery store. I ran into my old friend Sharon, and she started telling me about the wonderful housewarming party my son Mark and his wife Jessica had thrown the weekend before. A party at my house. And I hadn't been invited. Sharon went on and on about how beautiful everything looked. Jessica gave everyone a tour, she said, her voice full of excitement. She talked all about her design choices and the big plans she has for the kitchen. Everyone was so impressed that they could afford a place like that. I just stood there, holding a can of soup, feeling the cold metal dig into my palm. The worst part wasn't that I wasn't invited. The worst part was the lie. Jessica had stood in the home I gave her and pretended she had earned it. She erased me from my own story, from my own life, in front of all those people. She was wearing my generosity like a costume, pretending to be someone she wasn't. I felt like the biggest fool in the whole state of Ohio. It wasn't about a vase or hurt feelings anymore. She was trying to steal my history. And I had to wonder, what was she going to try and steal next? I knew I couldn't let it go. I had to talk to Mark, my son, and I had to do it alone. A few days later, I drove over to the Maple Creek house, hoping to catch him on his lunch break. As I pulled up to the curb, I saw my daughter-in-law, Jessica, standing in the front yard, chatting on her phone. I was about to just drive away when I saw her laugh, a sharp, ugly sound. I rolled my window down just a crack, and her words floated out into the quiet afternoon air. "No, Carol's not here," she said into the phone. "Honestly, it's basically my house now anyway. She just holds the paper." Then she said the 9 words that froze the blood in my veins. "Possession is 9/10 of the law, right?" And she laughed again. She wasn't just being entitled. She wasn't just being rude. This was a plan. She truly believed that by living in my home she had more right to it than I did. She saw me as a problem, a piece of paper that was in her way. As I put the car in reverse, my hands shaking on the wheel, I knew I wasn't dealing with a difficult daughter-in-law. I was dealing with an enemy who was living inside my house. After hearing what I heard, I didn't know what to do, so I did nothing. I waited, my heart a bundle of nerves, for a week. Then the phone rang. It was my daughter-in-law, Jessica, and her voice was like honey, which always meant she was about to ask for something big. She told me how much they loved the house, how it was their forever home. Then she got to the point. She had a contractor, she said, and they were ready to remodel the kitchen. She had the quote right in front of her. "It's only $40,000, she said, as if she were asking for a cup of sugar. "So, I was just wondering when you could transfer the money to our account." I was so shocked I actually laughed. I told her that was completely out of the question. The honey in her voice turned to poison in a second. "So you expect us to live in this dated, ugly house forever?" she snapped. "This is about our happiness, Carol. Don't you want your son to be happy?" She twisted my words, making me sound like a monster who was keeping her in a dungeon. I started to say something else, but she cut me off. The line went dead. She had hung up on me. She hadn't just asked for my money, she had demanded it. And when I said no, she punished me for it. That night, my son, Mark, called. For a moment, my heart leaped with hope. I thought he was calling to apologize, to say he'd finally put his foot down. But that's not what happened. His voice was tired, like a rope being pulled from 2 different directions. "Mum, I'm sorry about Jessica," he started, but his words were weak. "She just gets these ideas in her head. She had this whole vision for our life and it's not matching up." He sounded like he was making excuses for a child, not a grown woman who had just demanded thousands of dollars from me. I asked him, my voice pleading, if he could see how wrong this was. He got quiet for a moment, then defensive. "What do you want me to do, Mom?" he said, his voice cracking. "Kick my wife out on the street?" The question was a slap in the face. He was making me the bad guy, as if I were the one causing all the trouble. He ended the call by begging me to just let it go for a little while, to give her some space. He wasn't asking for my understanding. He was asking for my surrender. And in that moment, I faced the terrible truth. If I was going to fight for my home, my own son was not going to be by my side. 2 weeks went by in complete silence. Not a call, not a text. The quiet was louder than any argument. A dark feeling started to grow in my stomach, a feeling that something was very wrong. One afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to see my house. I got in my car and drove over to Maple Creek, telling myself I would just use my old spare key to peek inside while they were at work. I just needed to know the place was okay. I walked up the familiar stone path my husband had laid all those years ago. My hands were shaking a little as I put the old brass key into the lock. It wouldn't turn. I jiggled it, thinking it was just stuck. Nothing. I tried again, pushing harder. The key wouldn't budge. My blood ran cold as the truth hit me with the force of a punch. They had changed the locks. They had changed the locks on my house and hadn't even told me. Standing on my own porch, holding a key that was now just a useless piece of metal, I had never felt so powerless. They thought they had locked me out. They had no idea that what they had really done was lock in my decision to fight back. That night, just as I was sitting down with a cup of tea I couldn't drink, my doorbell rang. It was my son, Mark, looking like he hadn't slept in a week. He stumbled into my living room and fell onto the sofa, burying his face in his hands. He told me he was the one who changed the locks, that his wife, Jessica, had demanded it after our last phone call. But that wasn't the worst of it. He looked up, his eyes red and full of shame. He said he had been on their shared laptop and had seen Jessica's internet search history. My heart pounded in my chest as he spoke. "Squatters' rights in Ohio, Mum," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Can you evict family if there is no lease? How to claim legal residency in a home you don't own?" Each phrase was a stab to my heart. This wasn't just a series of bad moods or entitled requests. This was premeditated. My daughter-in-law had been actively researching ways to legally steal my home from me. The joke I'd overheard about possession is 9/10 of the law was never a joke at all. It was her battle plan. He looked at me, his eyes full of a fear I'd never seen before, and I knew that even this horrible discovery wasn't the whole story. I looked at my son, my only child, and I saw a stranger, a man so broken and afraid. "Why, Mark?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Why would you let her do this?" That's when he finally fell apart, sobbing like he was a little boy again. He told me the real reason he had been so weak, so quiet through all of this. Years ago, before he even met Jessica, he had made a huge financial mistake, a secret he had kept from everyone, a secret that had almost ruined him. He was so ashamed of it. But somehow, Jessica had found out. "She's been holding it over my head ever since, Mom," he choked out between sobs. "Every time I tried to stand up to her about how she was treating you, she would threaten to tell you everything. She said you would see what a failure I was." My boy was being blackmailed. This whole time he had been trapped. His wife was using his past shame as a weapon to control him and to isolate him from me. My anger toward him just melted away. It was replaced by a deep, aching sadness. My son wasn't a coward. He was a prisoner. And in that moment, I stopped seeing him as part of the problem. I knew right then that we had to become the solution, together. We sat there in the quiet of my living room as the truth settled between us. For the first time in months, we were on the same side. We were a team. I told Mark that we couldn't just confront his wife, Jessica. She was too sneaky. She would twist the story, lie her way out of it, and find a way to make us the villains. We needed a plan that was smarter than she was. A plan that was quiet, legal, and final. He looked at me, and I saw a flicker of the strong sun I used to know return to his eyes. He nodded, wiping away his tears. We agreed he would go back to the house and pretend nothing had changed. He would continue to play the part of the beaten-down husband, all while being my eyes and ears. He would let me know what she was planning, what she was saying. He hated the idea of lying, but we both knew it was the only way. He was going back behind enemy lines. He left my house that night with a heavy secret, but a lighter heart, because he was no longer alone, and neither was I. The war for my home was no longer just my fight. It was ours, and it had just begun. The next morning I woke up and the fear was gone. In its place was a cold, hard resolve. I wasn't going to be a victim anymore. I sat at my kitchen table, looked up the number for the best real estate agent in Maple Creek, a man named David, and I made the call. My voice didn't even shake. I explained the situation carefully, telling him I owned a house that was occupied and that I needed to sell it without the person living there knowing. I was worried he would think I was crazy, but he was calm and professional. He understood right away. "We can do this quietly, Carol," he said, his voice so reassuring. "It's called a pocket listing. We don't put a sign in the yard. I only show it to serious buyers I already know are looking. She'll never even know what's happening." He told me the market was so hot that a nice little house like mine would probably sell in a week. A week. After months of feeling trapped, that one word sounded like freedom. When I hung up the phone, I felt a strength I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't a sad old widow anymore. I was a seller. And my daughter-in-law had no idea she was living in a house that was now officially on the market. There was one big problem. David, my realtor, needed pictures of the inside of the house. We couldn't just walk in and take them. That's when my son, Mark, came up with a brilliant plan. He waited until a Tuesday afternoon, when he knew his wife Jessica was in the middle of a big meeting at work. He called her, making his voice sound panicked. "Honey," he said, "the utility company just called. There might be a gas leak in the neighborhood. They have to send an inspector in right now." Jessica, of course, said she couldn't leave her important meeting. That was our chance. The inspector, who showed up at the door, was David, along with a photographer carrying a clipboard to look official. They were in and out in 20 minutes, taking pictures of every room, every corner. Mark stayed on the phone with Jessica the whole time, giving her updates so she wouldn't get suspicious. It was a terrible lie, and a part of me felt sick about it. But then I remembered the changed locks, and the crystal vase, and the words, "Possession is 9/10 of the law." We had to fight fire with fire. We got the pictures. We had everything we needed. Jessica went home that night and slept in a house she had no idea had just been put up for sale. 2 days later, David the realtor called me, and he sounded like he'd just won the lottery. "Carol, you are not going to believe this," he said, his voice buzzing with excitement. "I have an offer. It's for 20% over your asking price. They're paying in cash, and they want to close in 2 weeks. I almost dropped the phone. It was happening so fast. I was so thrilled I didn't even think to ask who the buyers were until David said their names. "It's a lovely older couple," he said. "Robert and Susan Miller." My breath caught in my throat. I made him repeat the names. The Millers. They were Jessica's parents. The same parents she had cut off nearly 2 years ago because they judged her. The same parents she had been lying to, telling them she and Mark were big successes who had bought a beautiful home. It was like a lightning bolt from heaven. This wasn't just a sale anymore. This was fate. It was the perfect, most incredible way to not just end this nightmare, but to make sure Jessica's entire world of lies came crashing down all at once. I took a deep, steadying breath and said to David, "They are the perfect buyers. Draw up the papers immediately." The next week passed in a blur of secret phone calls. My son, Mark, and I met with the realtor, David, at a small title company in the next town over, where no one would recognize us. The buyers, Jessica's parents, were doing everything remotely, so we didn't have to see them. They had no idea I was their daughter's mother-in-law, and I had no idea they were just excited to move closer to a daughter who was lying to them. The whole thing felt like a spy movie. I sat at a big wooden table with a pile of papers in front of me, my son beside me. He squeezed my hand and whispered, "Are you sure about this, Mom?" I looked at the pen in my hand and thought of the changed locks, the stolen vase, and the sound of my son sobbing in my living room. I was more than sure. I signed my name, and with each letter, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I wasn't losing a home. I was getting my life back. The man from the title company shook my hand. It was done. The funds were transferred. Legally, the house in Maple Creek was no longer mine. It now belonged to Robert and Susan Miller. The trap was built. The door was set. All I had to do now was invite the mouse to the cheese. With the deed signed and the money in my bank, it was time to set the final part of my plan in motion. I picked up the phone and called my daughter-in-law, Jessica. I took a deep breath and made my voice sound warm and a little shaky, like an old woman who was tired of fighting. "Jessica, dear," I said, "I've been doing a lot of thinking. I want to put all this unpleasantness behind us. Why don't you and Mark come over for dinner on Saturday? I have a special gift for you both to celebrate your future in the house." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. Her suspicion was fighting with her ego, and I knew her ego would win. The idea of me finally giving up and giving her a gift was just too good for her to resist. "Okay, Carol," she finally said, her voice practically dripping with victory. "We'll be there." She thought she was coming to a surrender dinner. She had no idea she was the guest of honor at her own downfall. The stage was set, and all the actors were about to take their places. Saturday night arrived. My son Mark and his wife Jessica walked into my home. Jessica had a smug, triumphant smile on her face. She looked around my living room like she was already deciding which of my things she would want after I was gone. Mark played his part perfectly, looking quiet and defeated. We made small talk for a few minutes, the air so thick with tension I could barely breathe. Then, right on cue, the doorbell rang. "Oh, excuse me," I said, getting up. "I invited a few other people. I hope you don't mind." I opened the door and there they were, Robert and Susan Miller, Jessica's parents. They walked in, smiling, so happy to be there. The colour drained from Jessica's face. Her smug smile vanished, replaced by a look of pure animal panic. "Mum? Dad?" she stammered. "What are you doing here?" Her parents rushed over to hug her, completely unaware of the drama. "We wanted to surprise you, honey," her mum said. The confident woman who had walked into my house just minutes before was gone. In her place was a terrified girl, trapped in a room with her own lies. And the night was just getting started. We all sat down at my dining room table, but no one was eating. The air was thick with unspoken words. Jessica's parents, Robert and Susan, were trying their best to be cheerful, talking about how excited they were to be in the area. My daughter-in-law, Jessica, just stared at her plate, her face as white as a sheet. My son, Mark, sat beside her, looking down at his hands. After a few painful minutes, I stood up and tapped my water glass with a spoon. "I'd like to make a toast," I said, my voice clear and steady. Every eye in the room turned to me. I raised my glass. "This is a toast to family," I said, looking right at Jessica. "And it's a toast to home and about the importance of getting what you truly deserve." I put my glass down and reached into my pocket. "You once told me that the house was your house now, so I wanted to give you a gift to make that official." I pulled out a single, shiny silver key and held it up for the whole table to see. It was so small, but it felt as heavy as a stone. Jessica stared at it like it was a snake. She knew this was the end, she just didn't know how. I walked around the table until I was standing right behind my daughter-in-law, Jessica. She flinched as I came closer. I didn't say a word. I just reached down and placed the shiny new key into her trembling hand. "You were right," I said softly, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "You said it was your house now, but you forgot one little step. You have to deal with the owners." I let that sink in for a moment before I continued. This is the key to the front door. The new owners closed on the house this afternoon and they wanted me to give this to you. They said they expect you to be moved out by the end of the month." Then I turned my head and smiled warmly at her shocked parents. "Robert, Susan, congratulations on your new home," I said. "I am so very glad we were able to make a deal. I truly hope you'll be very happy living in Maple Creek." The words hung in the air. Jessica's father stared at me, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. Her mother's hand flew to her chest. For 1 second there was a perfect, terrible silence in the room as everyone's brain tried to catch up. And then the silence broke. Jessica let out a scream. It wasn't a sad sound. It was a wild, cornered animal sound of pure rage. "What?" her father Robert demanded, looking from my face to his wife's. "What is she talking about? We bought the house." The truth finally hit them. Their daughter wasn't a successful homeowner. She was a freeloader who had just been kicked out. Jessica jumped up from her chair and pointed a shaking finger at me. "You're a monster!" she shrieked. "You ruined my life!" Then she spun around and faced my son. "And you!" she screamed at Mark. "You knew! You let this happen!" That was the moment. My son, Mark, stood up, and for the first time, he looked taller than I had ever seen him. His voice didn't shake. "You did this to yourself, Jessica," he said, his words cutting through her screaming. "You did this when you threatened to tell my family my secret just to control me. You did this when you researched how to steal my mother's house. This is all you." The word steal hung in the air and her parents gasped. Her lies were all gone, burned away in the fire of the truth. She looked from my face to her husband's, to her parents. There was no escape. There was no one left to lie to. After my son Mark spoke the truth, all the fight went out of my daughter-in-law Jessica. Her screaming stopped. Her rage collapsed into ugly, pathetic sobs. She sank back into her chair, a ruined queen on a broken throne. Her father, Robert Miller, stood up. He was a quiet man, but his voice was like stone when he spoke to his only daughter. He didn't yell. He was much colder than that. "We will honor the 30-day notice that Carol gave you," he said. "Get your things and get out of our house." The disgust in his voice was the final blow. Mark walked over to my side and put his arm around my shoulder. He looked at the weeping woman at the table and said, "I'm leaving with my mum. We're done, Jessica." I didn't feel happy watching her fall apart. I just felt a deep, weary sadness. This whole mess was a tragedy of her own making. Her parents didn't even look at her as they walked out of my house. Mark and I left right after them, leaving her there, a crumpled mess on my dining room floor, completely and utterly alone. The war was over, and she had lost everything. Later that night, long after everyone was gone, Mark and I sat in my quiet living room. There were no more secrets between us. He looked at me, his eyes full of a pain that was years in the making, and he gave me the apology I had been waiting for. It wasn't just for his silence, or for letting his wife walk all over me. He was sorry for his own fear. "I'm so sorry, Mum," he said, his voice thick with tears. "I was so ashamed of my past mistakes that I let her use them to build a wall between us. I was a coward. And I am so sorry I let you face her all alone." I took his hand. It was the first time in a long time that I felt like I truly had my son back. We talked for hours that night, for the first time in years. The lies were gone. The secrets were gone. He told me how free he felt, now that the truth was out in the open. The woman who had tried to tear my family apart had failed. In the end, her cruelty and her greed had only made our bond stronger. It had been a terrible, painful journey, but I had my son back. And that was worth more than any house. True to their word, Jessica's parents made her leave the house. They called me a week later to apologize for their daughter's behavior, their voices full of shame. They told me they couldn't bring themselves to live in the Maple Creek house now. It just held too many bad memories. So they decided to rent it out. A month later, I got a call from Susan Miller. She told me they'd rented the house to a wonderful young couple with a new baby, the Garcias. One sunny afternoon, I found myself driving through my old neighborhood. I slowed down as I passed the house, and I saw them. The young husband was out front, pushing his laughing baby on a little swing he had hung from the big oak tree in the yard. His wife came out with a glass of lemonade for him. They looked so happy, so full of hope. It was the exact picture I had always held in my heart for that home. Seeing them, a wave of pure peace washed over me. The house was no longer a place of conflict or pain. It was finally what it was always meant to be, a place of love. The property was at peace. But I soon learned there was one final secret hidden within its walls. About a month after I saw the new family in the yard, I got a phone call I never expected. It was Robert Miller, my former daughter-in-law's father. He sounded nervous on the phone. "Carol," he said, "I hope I'm not bothering you, but we were cleaning out the attic in the Maple Creek house to make some more room for the tenants. We found something." He told me that tucked away under a loose floorboard was a small, dusty wooden box. He pried it open, and inside, among a few old photographs, was a sealed envelope. My heart started to beat a little faster. "What did it say?" I asked. Mr. Miller cleared his throat. "Well, that's why I'm calling," he said. "It has your name on it, Carol. It's written in what I can only guess is your late husband's handwriting." I felt the air leave my lungs. A letter. A final message from my husband, hidden away for decades, found by the father of the woman who had caused me so much pain. Mr. Miller offered to drop it by right away. As I waited for him to arrive, I could only wonder, what could my husband have possibly needed to tell me from beyond the grave? I sat in my favourite armchair, holding the old, yellowed envelope in my hands. His handwriting was just as I remembered it. My hands trembled as I opened the seal. The letter was dated 20 years ago, right after we had moved into this bigger house, leaving our little starter home behind. I began to read his words, and the tears started to fall. "My dearest Carol," it began, "I know we're happy in the new place, but a part of my heart will always be in this little house." He went on to write about his dreams for it, how he hoped our children or grandchildren might live there one day. But then he wrote the words that changed everything. "But listen to me," he wrote. "This house is a foundation, Carol, not a possession. If it ever becomes a source of conflict or greed, I want you to let it go. Sell it, and use the money to have a new adventure. Our love was built in that house, but it doesn't live there. It lives with you." He was giving me his blessing. He was freeing me from any guilt. His words were a gift, a permission slip from the past, telling me that what I had done was not just right, it was what our love demanded. Reading that letter was like the sun coming out after a long, dark storm. All this time, a small part of me had worried that I had betrayed my husband's memory by selling our first home. I worried that my anger at Jessica had made me do something selfish. But my husband's words washed all that away. He understood, even all those years ago, that a home is only as good as the love inside it. My fight wasn't just petty revenge against a greedy girl. It was a fight to protect our legacy of love from being twisted into something ugly. As I folded the letter and put it away, the last bit of anger in my heart finally disappeared. It was replaced by a deep, quiet peace. I had fought a war I never wanted. But in the end, I hadn't just won back my son and my peace of mind. I had honoured my husband. The story of the house was finally over. The last ghost was laid to rest. I was free to close that chapter of my life, not with bitterness, but with a peaceful heart, knowing I had kept our love safe all along. 6 months have passed since that terrible dinner party. My life has found a new, quiet rhythm. My son Mark is himself again. He's going to therapy to unpack everything his ex-wife put him through, and he comes over for dinner every Sunday, just like he used to. His laugh is real now, not the strained, tired sound it used to be. It's the sound of a man who is finally free. And as for me, I took my husband's advice from that beautiful letter he left me. He told me to have a new adventure, and that's exactly what I decided to do. I used some of the money from the sale of the house to book a trip to Italy. It was a place he and I had always dreamed of seeing together. Going alone feels a little scary, but it also feels right. It's a new chapter for me, one that isn't about being a wife or a mother-in-law, but just about being Carol. The whole ordeal taught me that my generosity is not a weakness, but it also taught me that you can't offer a good heart to people who don't have one of their own. I am still a kind person, but I am no longer a foolish one. Every now and then, I hear little whispers about my former daughter-in-law Jessica. I don't ask, but news travels in a small town. After the divorce was final, she moved to a different state. Her parents, Robert and Susan, don't speak to her anymore. I heard they've become like honorary grandparents to the little Garcia baby who lives in their house now. They send me a Christmas card every year. Jessica, I'm told, tells a very different version of our story to the new people in her life. She tells them that her jealous, evil mother-in-law conspired to steal her house and turn her whole family against her. When I first heard that, I thought it might make me angry. But it didn't. It just made me feel a little sad for her. She can tell whatever stories she wants. It doesn't matter, because the people who know the truth know it. She has to live in a world made up of her own lies, while I get to live in the real one, surrounded by real love. She is trapped in the past, forever the victim of her own story. I, on the other hand, am free, and my story has a much happier ending. Looking back, I know I did the right thing. I handled the situation with a quiet strength I never knew I had. It was a clean, legal and karmically satisfying conclusion to a painful chapter. The whole ordeal with my son, his wife, and the house was truly one of the most unbelievable things I have ever been through. It showed me just how ugly people can be when they are consumed by greed. But as crazy as that whole story was, it doesn't even come close to the time my own sister tried to have me declared incompetent just to get her hands on our family inheritance after our parents passed away. The things she did, the lies she told, and the battle that followed. It makes Jessica look like an amateur. Now that, my friend, is a story for another day.